I'm sure most of you already know this, but we'll just do like a little quick intro. But Jen is my co-CEO at our business Datable, which is basically helping women business owners leverage data in their businesses. So that's like some of what we're going to be talking about today. But Jen, just give us like a little Jen rundown for a second, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so I, like Lacey said, co-CEO at Datable. I have been in what I would call measurement marketing for quite a few years now. I started more in kind of the operations side of the online space as like a DOO or an OBM, and then fractional COO, and then ultimately started to specialize in measurement because I was behind the scenes in some of these really large businesses and found that like that was the thing that allowed us to align resources, to make better decisions, to give CEO confidence. And I also realized there weren't a lot of people that knew how to do it. So it kind of became a little bit of a blue ocean for me where I was able to kind of build an entire business around it, build a service around it. And I've married a mechanical engineer. So I always say I'm like a nerd translator. And so I found that I was able to take things that seem really complicated and distill it down into language that someone that's maybe not a numbers person or not a tech person could understand. I also have this whole little side business called a full-time corporate job that I took on about a year and a half ago. I am one of the weirdos that actually loves corporate. Like I feel like I learned so much from, and I'm in a Fortune.
Yeah.
Now I think they're number 6. My husband and I were just teasing because it used to be 4. So he's like, you're dropping down the ranks. But I'm the 6th largest company in the United States. So what's really cool about that is I get to learn a lot from what corporate's doing while still getting to work very closely with small businesses and co-run one of my own. And yeah, that's like high level. I'm sure I'm missing some things in there, but I've always been someone that's like leveraged this kind of stuff in business.
I think that's like a great segue. Yeah. Michelle says she loves it. You love both. Yeah. And that's kind of like the great segue to what we're going to talk about. So basically, the data point we're using here is this McKinsey and Company study that says that businesses that make data-driven decisions are 23 times more likely to acquire customers, 6 times more likely to retain customers, and 19 times more likely to be profitable than those that don't. Those are wild. Like 23 times more likely to get a customer, 19 times more likely to be profitable. Like those are insane. And it's helpful because it goes off of what you're saying, which is like, I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes we vilify corporate, and I love that you straddle the line so much because they're big companies because they know what they're doing to a very large extent, right? And like what they're doing is using data. And I think like that's what is so helpful here. And I think we just like, to me, I'm just like always mind blown how much we miss that in the online space of like, okay, well, if I'm not saying we have to model ourselves after like every Fortune 5 company, but if we know one of the major things that they're doing that like gives them it leverage is using data, like the fact that we would just like openly choose not to use it almost seems crazy, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be hard. Like it doesn't have to be, I think people hear data and they think like, oh, I would need to hire like an analyst, or I would need to go back to school, or I would need some like complicated thing. And it doesn't need to be. It can be simple things that make, that can really make powerful changes within your business. The other thing I would say when you were talking about like vilifying corporate and the companies doing something right, I was watching a YouTube video sometime in the past couple of months. I want to say it was Layla Hormozi, and she was talking about things that online business COOs can do to actually help with revenue and like retention and all of the important metrics that we care about as business owners. And she was kind of joking and saying like in the online space, though, it's become this thing where the COO or the OBM or the DOO is like writing SOPs, right? Like that's their focus. Yeah. And she's like, do you really think Sheryl Sandberg is writing SOPs? Like, right. That's not what she's doing, right? So like, how are we, and that's not to say like, obviously somebody that's running a $2 million business online, that COO is not going to do the same thing as Sheryl Sandberg, but also like maybe there are pieces of what she's doing that they should be more focused on, right? Like optimizing team, optimizing expenses, renegotiating, vendors. People don't realize online you can do that kind of stuff. So, and the way that they do that is through data. Like data is what enables it. So it's so funny because I'm actually starting to see more of this come up in the content that I consume of people being like, kind of like, hey, wait, like, maybe these big companies aren't entirely wrong. Like they're certainly not doing everything right, which we can see through the news through layoffs and just many of the things, but they are doing some things right. and that's what's actually paying for them to be able to do all the other things that they do wrong and have all the excess fluff that we don't have the luxury of having in our space.
It's so true. Sonia says here, for simple, need to learn more about using and applying the data. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today for sure. Hey, Natalie, we're going to talk about like, why is this actually a thing? Why does this actually get you better results? How can you start using these like data-driven decisions? And how can you also use it to serve your clients as well? I think that's a really big part for me that I'm feeling quite passionate about lately too, is like talking about like, okay, yeah, like we need to use data in our own businesses, but like if you're serving clients in their businesses too, how, like, are you using it there? I think that's a really big differentiator right now in our space. And I don't think a lot of people are doing that. So I want to talk about that too. Hey, Steph, welcome. So yes, we need to like take some notes here. I think like Jen said, she learned so much from corporate. And again, it doesn't mean that we're like, okay, everything they do is right. But like when we can see something and when we can see statistics, like, okay, it'll give us 23 times more of an ability to acquire customers. Like for me, that feels super obvious. I wonder if it does for other people, why that's true. So I'm like curious to hear if you guys are like, oh yeah, of course, data would make me 23 times more likely to acquire a customer. If you're like, I don't even get the connection there, I don't get how that would be true. I feel free to just be honest with us. But let's talk through that, because I think that that's helpful to see why that would be true. Like, yes, we can have like a statistic that tells us that, but why is that actually true? So the reason it's going to make you 23 times more likely to acquire customers because you're actually going to do the things that are working to acquire customers. I think that you would be so shocked. I'm going to have Jen talk on this a little bit more, but like, I think you would be so shocked how many people, whether they have like a very, very, very small business or $1 million plus business, are doing a bunch of stuff that is not actually working, that they think is working because they're just not studying it. They're not actually looking at data. So they're like, oh yeah, we pay, I'm just making something up. We pay like a Pinterest person $500 a month. And there's just like an assumption because they do that it means that's generating them leads. And that's not actually true. And so we can spend a lot of time, energy, and effort on things that aren't working. And so the reason it gets us 23 times more likely to acquire customers is because we put all of that energy and effort to shit that actually works. Jen, I feel like you have so much to say about this because you've seen this behind the scenes so much. So I'll let you kind of like run with that. But yeah, I just want to make it really clear why that statistic would obviously be true.
Yeah, no, and I'll give a couple examples right here just because I think it's easy when someone's like, oh, I don't use Pinterest, right? Like you start to think like that's not me. So I'm going to if it's okay if I take a few minutes, like I'll give a couple examples. So one like really funny one is that I often see that there's like tech issues that break the user journey and people don't realize that. And so, for example, I was working with an entrepreneur that had like a live event and she sent out a link and then she was wondering why nobody was buying. And so it could have been super easy, right, for her to think like her event was a failure or like her sales page wasn't strong. The link in the email was broken. But like, how did she find that through data? Because the numbers didn't make sense why there was no traffic when we saw people from the email were clicking, right? So one example, Pinterest is one I actually do have a story on. There was a blogger that I worked with, and this isn't like blogger like I talk about my weekend. She was making multiple seven figures, like a very well-known parenting blogger, and she was spending a ton of money on organic Facebook, like posting and sharing recipes in Facebook groups, running Facebook groups, doing these things in Facebook groups, which work phenomenally for coaching, for example. But but this was something that the bloggers were also doing. But when we looked at her data, like 70 or 80% of her traffic was actually coming from Pinterest, and we were barely spending any time there. So it was like, wow, imagine if we took all of that money that we're spending on Facebook that's getting us almost no results and shift those resources, that time, energy, effort, money onto Pinterest, which already is working while we're doing next to nothing, and imagine the output, right? And immediately she started making more money. Same client, another example, we were looking at her top 10 most trafficked blog posts, and 8 of the 10 didn't have any link to any of her products. So there was like no monetization there. So you're sending people, like this is the most populated place, right? It's like why, you go to like a mall and they have stands everywhere and there's stuff everywhere. It's like they want to maximize where the people are. And she was not maximizing where the people are. We've had examples of sales pages, people paying tens of thousands of dollars to like redo entire sales pages when there was just an issue with like people not being able to see that they're supposed to scroll down, right? Like, so many cases of it, whether it's it helps you find tech issues, it helps you just find user issues, but it helps you really pinpoint what is the right problem to solve and what is currently working. And I think it also, like, what reminds me of corporate here too is like there's a lot in HR and corporate about like, do you focus on someone's strengths or do you focus on their opportunities, right? And from like your days in corporate, that's like a long time like people think. And I think too often in the online space, like we're always trying to find the problem and fix the problem versus like, what is working? Hi, there's these strengths over here. And that's the way that corporate is really starting to move, where it's like, rather than saying like this person in order to do this needs to like improve in all these other ways, it's like, no, how do they better leverage the strength that they have, right? Like, and that's literally the definition of leverage or something close to it.
Yes, it's so funny because actually I text Jen the other day because I was looking at our dashboard at A Lit Up Life, and all of a sudden our website traffic like spiked so much. And we do really good tracking. Like we do UTM tracking, we do all the things. So I can always tell like what's like sending traffic and why. And in this particular case, it had no UTM link. So we weren't clear where it was coming from. And Jen was like, something you did outside of like what you normally do went viral. You need to go figure out what that is and you need to go leverage it because it's working really well. And it's like so helpful to see those things. So then I was able to track back and be like, oh, I was on this podcast recently that I didn't even think was a big thing. And so interesting, that audience has like really, 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 really like taken on a life of its own with like this topic. I need to go do more on that topic. Like it was so helpful. And it's like you're saying, Jen, it wasn't like me being like, oh, like something's broken or whatever. It was like me being like, oh shit, I had no idea that was gonna like, create the surge it did. I really need to like think more about this. I need to do more with this. And it's like giving me this really awesome leverage point in my business. But I was like, it surged so much that I was like, Jen, I think our dashboard's broken. And Jen was like, so it's not, you need to go figure out like what's going on there. And it's like really helpful.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And like podcasts in particular are always a fascinating one because they have such a long tail.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. Like I was on a podcast once and for 2 years, like 2 full years, I was regularly getting both traffic and sales from that one podcast episode. And I was like, goodness, right? And that might not be the case in everybody's specific niche or whatever, but like being able to find those things and then going, oh, if this one works really well, let me try 2 more and see if that was just like a one-off, like that was a really good podcast, or if maybe this is the right marketing vehicle for me. Oh, wow, those 2 did the same thing. Cool. Now I know like I should just spend my time being on podcasts instead of like making Pinterest graphics or trying to film clever TikTok reels or Instagram reels or whatever, right? Like I'm mixing up all the marketing things now because I look at marketing stuff all day. But I just think there's so much opportunity there. And you're right. It's like not at all always about like fixing a problem, although I think you will find the problems that you need to fix. And if you're looking for problems and you're trying to like optimize and things like that, 100%. But also I think it just identifies a lot of low-hanging fruit that you're like, oh, shoot, I had no idea that like that was the thing that like, carried me last year, that, this much of my sales came from that one thing or this one group or that one person or whatever.
That's Brittany just said, it's like where to like hone your energy, and exactly that. Natalie said makes perfect sense. It's easy to spend loads of times on things you think or assume are working. Exactly. The amount of assumptions we make as business owners without data is so wild. Like the more and more deep I get into this, I like will never ever, and I do not mean this in a bad way, but I will never ever take a client telling me something's working at face value. I'm like, how do we know? Tell me exactly how you know that's true. And they're like, well, I'm getting sales. And I'm like, no, tell me more. That doesn't mean anything. Tell me exactly how you know that this is the thing that's getting you those sales, because our brains will just make shit up and fill in gaps. Like our brains are literally designed to fill in gaps. And so they will, and then you'll think it's true. And you could spend years in your business like that parent blogger you were talking about, Jen, she could spend years in her business being like, Facebook groups work so well for us because she just has somehow decided that because she's getting sales, when that was not true. And so it's almost scary how much our brains will fill in those gaps. And I think it's relevant to say that because, it can really, really lead you down a path where like maybe things are fine, but you're probably that blogger, like she was probably leaving like $1 million on the table at that point, and it's fine because she's making two, but it's not fine in the regard of like how hard she's like putting in effort for that. Right.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And I think like the coaching piece is really interesting here because I always, for those of you that don't know, we forgot to mention this at the beginning. Lacey was my coach for a long time when I was running like the ops business. And then even when I started into like shifting into measurement. And like, that was always one of the reasons that kept me staying with Lacey, was that it was not just like the standard kind of like business coaching, but that you always did like, I would like just underline business in business coaching that you did, because you were always taking it to that next step, being like, but how do we know? Like, and that didn't mean that you knew at like, I still don't know that you like how well going into the back end of like Google Analytics, right? But that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, what you did know was how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And you knew enough about the types of metrics that people should be looking at and like high level how to find it. And I think that's what to me made you like a super exceptional coach, was that you were able to help guide through that. And I even see it now as you still work with clients, right? Like you'll be like, hey, how do you find this one thing? And I'm like, oh, here, like, so it's like, you don't need, for those, anybody listening that's like, oh, I could never like incorporate data or ask my clients about data in coaching because I don't know everything in the world that there is to know about data. Like, neither do I, right? Like, neither does Lacey. Like, you just need to understand, like Lacey just said, sometimes it's as simple as like, how do you know? What did you check? Is there a way, right? Like it's understanding. And I do think like you getting a foundational baseline of information about like what is possible. Like we have I'm kind of a spoiler, but like we have a cool webinar coming out sometime in the next month. We're still picking the date, but like, it's basically like what you could know about your business. Because we realize that so many people are like, oh shit, you can know that. And we're like, yeah. And it's actually super easy to find and it's not hard. And so just like knowing the things that your clients could know and helping them find that, I think is a coaching retention tool personally.
Oh my gosh, so much, because, and it also like, to me, it like always, everybody's saying their brains make up a lot of bad shit. I agree. Same. Jen would agree with that too. But yeah, like I think it's definitely a retention tool, but it's also one of those things too, where it like hands your client their power back a lot of the time too, right? Because it's like, you're not like, I have all the answers. Like, I feel like my approach to most of my clients is like, you have all the answers. I can help ask the right questions about like, how do we know this or where have we tracked that? But like, you have that within your business. And I think that's really empowering. And I think it goes to what Nova's saying here, which is she said, and it's scary how easy it is for marketers to capitalize on our ignorance and make us believe their thing is the thing while siphoning our bank accounts. Like, okay, this is a little embarrassing. I probably shouldn't even say this, but sometimes I feel like, oh my God, I really shouldn't say this. I'm going to say it in a slightly different way. Sometimes I feel like Jen and I are like on this like mission where like, I'm like, we're basically like Batman and Robin. I don't know who's who. I think Jen's probably Batman in this scenario, but like, we're basically like Batman and Robin being like, you don't have to listen to all these people. You could just know this stuff. Like you have this information. Like, I'm like, I don't even care if we make money from this. Like, I just feel like I'm like on this kind of mission to be like, everyone that's telling you they know what is best from you does not actually know what is best for you, because you do not have information that is like leading them to that,
100%. Oh my gosh, it's so funny that you brought that up, because this morning I was working out and I always listen to like podcasts or YouTube videos when I'm working out, and I was listening to a YouTube video and it was unrelated to measurement. And it was actually about journaling, ironically, but this guy tells the story about being able to look ahead and have this ability to kind of like know where you're going and see where you're going. And I promise this relates. And so it was talking some like war or something. I don't know. I was working out, but they were, all of these soldiers were like cutting down trees because they were trying to move through the forest to like escape the like other war group that they were against. And some guys finding like, hey, like, do we know we're going the right direction? And someone's like, yeah, like the person up front said this is the right way to go. And he's like, but like, did anybody check? And so the guy climbs the tree and he looks over and he sees like they're actually going toward the people that they're trying to go away from, but like nobody ever stopped to check. They just listened to the guy that was like, yeah, this is the right way. And so I like literally stopped my workout and jotted it down because I'm like, that is so relevant to this. It's exactly what we see, right? We see somebody that comes on and they're like, we made $4 million last year and it's because we used Instagram Reels. And you're like, I must use Instagram Reels. Like, this is the way I'm going to make $4 million. And like, cool. I have friends that are successful with every marketing tactic you can imagine, right? Like, I have friends that crush it on Reels. I have friends that do terrible on Reels, but crush it on TikTok. I have friends that use Pinterest. I have friends that have a newsletter, like that do in person. I just got, like, this is a Kohl's one, but like I got one of these mailers the other day for like digitalmarketer.com. Like anything can work for anyone, but it's like, but it depends on what you're doing, your business, etc. Just because it worked for Sally doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
I think that's always been true, but I also think, I think it's actually more true now than ever. Where like, I feel like I used to see more like across the board trends with clients, and now even that's gone now. Like when you just said that, I can literally think of one client I have who like Reels just crush for her. Nothing even touches that. And I can think of another client I have who her audience is just not responsive to Reels. We've basically taken them completely off the table. Like carousels are like the only thing that performs for her in a way that we need them to. And so like that like major discrepancy is, I think that's new-ish. Like I think like again, it's always been like right person, right thing, right audience, but I think like it can go so differently for different people is more so now than ever. And I think like that gone is that idea of, well, like Reels just work, so you have to do it, or like carousels are just the thing right now, so you have to. It's like you have to test and tweak and look at data from your own audience and figure that out, because that's truly like what's going to make the difference. And so anyone that's telling you it's just this thing and it's just this way, I would be skeptical of, because it means they're just marketing to you, or they really aren't also looking at any of that in their own business. They're just like, because it works for me, my assumption is that it works for you. And I think that's always a dangerous assumption in someone you're hiring, you know?
Yeah. And you said the piece about like, oh, something's performing. The other thing I would say is sometimes the performance metrics in these tools in isolation can be dangerously misleading.
That's
right?
So true.
Like when back, like, you know, when I first started doing the measurement stuff, I had tried my hand with like a couple reels and a couple stories, and I did the like funny whatever. And they did get more likes and they did get more views than any other post. And if I was just looking at those things, I would be like, cool, Reels work for me. But the reality was, when I dug deeper, Reels were not getting people to click on my profile. And if they're not clicking the link in my profile, they are not buying from me, right? Like, and so I was able to go a step deeper and go, okay, cool. I'm glad that this is clearly resonating with people, but is it actually getting them to take action? Because that's ultimately why I'm doing this, right? Like, I'm doing this because I want people to understand how important data is, and that they need to come and like experience the programs or the services or whatever I was offering at the time. But like, if you're just getting a whole bunch of likes, I mean, that feels good, but like,
well, it's so nuanced, right? Like something for me that I know in a lit up life right now is, I was actually talking about this last week a little bit too, which is like, I've added in quite a bit more personal posts here and there lately than I maybe ever have. One, because I really enjoy writing them, and two, because I really do see like an uptick in like engagement and saves and comments. But we have a spot open for one-on-one now. Well, applications just closed this week. I'm like choosing. Not one fucking person, not one. I literally mean not one person in all of that mentioned any one of those. They mentioned other things like the podcast, or like this one value post that I did about X. So it's like really interesting. Like Rhiannon says, yes, we love them. And like, yes, that's good. And like, I'll keep doing them sometimes, but I would never, ever pivot my whole business to just that kind of content, because I know that is not actually the content that is making people buy. It's making them maybe feel connected with me, and that's a precursor to buying, right? But it's definitely not the whole thing. And I think people get very confused in that, and they think, like you said, Jen, well, like Instagram shows me likes and whatever. And so that means something. And it's like, that might mean nothing actually in terms of your sales. And so that's why you have to take this further.
Yeah. Yeah. Wasn't there like some influencer last year or something that had like millions of followers and she tried to sell like one thing and nothing sold? And it turned
like
out
it was like she sold like 20 t-shirts or something. I think that was a couple of years ago, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
Like what are people moving toward? And exactly to your point, it doesn't mean that you speaking about personal things isn't resonating, isn't helping seal the deal for them, but it's not the thing, right? Like the thing is that you, on any platform that you are on, like you are consistent, you are all in, like you react and respond and adjust your approach based on data and feedback from your audience. Like I could go on and on about all the reasons that like the marketing that you do works, aside from just the fact that like you started introducing some personal posts.
Exactly. Right. Totally. Carly Jo said, I think there's so many options now for marketing. So it makes sense that not all of them are going to work for everyone anymore. And that's so true, right? Like when I'm talking about like, there would be trends, it's because there weren't like 5,000 options, you know, I mean, like Instagram, you just posted a picture on or something. There weren't like all of these like nuances. And so I think that's really true too. And again, that's why when we're talking about data, I mean, to be honest, 23 times more likely to like, as the stat, like I'm like, it's probably even more than that in our line of work to a certain extent, right? Because there's so much nuance to all of this and there's so many options and all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure the McKinsey Co study was like bigger businesses. So I think that's really interesting to think about too. The other thing it talked about is 19 times more likely to be profitable. And I want to talk about that for a second too, because that's something, you know, we'll even just go off of some of the examples Jen used earlier, but it's like, the reason it makes you more profitable is because you're not spending money on shit that doesn't work, which seems obvious, but I cannot tell you, like the number one problem I see in our space, I think, in terms of this is like spending a lot of money on stuff because you think it will work and then having no idea how to know if it's working, but being scared to stop spending on it. Right? Like insert whatever thing. You have a social media manager and they're doing engagement for you. And you're like, I don't know for sure if that's working, but I also don't know that it's not working. So I'm really scared to stop that because what if it stops my sales? And so I'm spending on that for maybe years without ever knowing for sure if that's working. Like that is going to eat into your profitability like crazy.
So yeah, so accurate. And I think the other thing is like, sometimes we don't factor in like how long something is going to take to work if it were to work. And I think Lacey, this is something you're really good at, is like, sometimes we talk about marketing even just for Datable. And it's like, this is a long-term play. Like we're going to do this one thing for a little while and it's not going to give us immediate results, but we're going to stick with it. And here are the indicators that we're going to look for to decide if we need to make changes along the way. But I do think like we've become such a culture of like everything is instant, right? Like I'm trying to lose weight and I am down like 11 pounds from April. Yay. But it's like, it kills me every day that like I eat healthy and then I get on the scale and I'm like, well, why am I not like, why have not all the weight?
You're like, right. Like, you're like, I ate asparagus. Where is my supermodel body? Like, what the fuck?
I think I literally sent you that text.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's true. And I think the same thing in online business, right? So like it's kind of one of two things. It's like you're either focused on the wrong thing for too long and you're spending all this money because you have no way of looking. And also like maybe like you haven't had that kind of conversation with yourself before starting to say like, you know, is this something that needs a longer period of time for us to really see the results from? And then if so, what are the other indicators we're going to use, right? For weight loss, for me, it was like, did I feel better? Am I sleeping better? Did my heartburn go away, right? Like I'm just kind of like riffing here, but that's the other indicators that you can be looking for. But I just see so much waste in business. And I feel terrible for people because there's so much marketing and there's like good marketing out there of people being like, this is the thing that you have to do. And you know, and it's easy to feel desperate. It's kind of like an extreme word, but like a little bit, I mean, I find myself like, I see a product on Instagram or TikTok and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need this because they had good marketers doing it. And I have to remind myself like, no, that's not the thing that's going to make a difference, right? The thing that's going to make a difference is knowing about what I'm doing and actually getting like having a feedback loop there to be able to adjust accordingly and make decisions in real time.
I think like something I want to talk about here, Jen, we didn't even talk about talking about this, but I think this is like a no-brainer to share here. Excuse me, is I don't know if y'all can see it, but like we just moved to like well, I guess it's a 12 grid, 9 grid, 12 grid, whatever, on Instagram for Datable for a few reasons. And I feel like most people would be like, oh my God, that's such a ballsy move. Like, you're just not going to market on Instagram. And like, yeah, we're just not going to market on Instagram because our data doesn't say that's where people are coming from. And it was taking a lot of work and effort that wasn't worth it. And so like, and we did a lot of both like really practical data. And then I also did a bunch of like just talking with like ideal clients and audience. And like what we ultimately came to is like our ideal client and audience, it does not enjoy learning a lot about data via Instagram. Like it's maybe a little too heavy for them there. It's maybe not like what's exciting them there. There's other specific ways that they very much enjoy learning about data. So we're just going to funnel our time into that. But the amount of like time, energy, and resources we were spending, we just weren't getting the return. And like Jen said, I'm a really long-term person. So we gave that a good 6+ months to see. And I mean, I'm not saying it didn't make us any sales. It just didn't make us enough that was worth what was going into it.
Yeah,
and so
we were paying more than we were making from Instagram.
Yes. And so I think it's just like helpful to see that. And it's not like we couldn't have tweaked more there. We just have other things that are working better. So we're going to go double down on those. And all that to say, I feel like when you see someone do something like that, it's really easy to either be like, oh my God, their shit is tanking, or, oh my God, that's such a ballsy move. Like, how would you even do that? And it's like, it just doesn't feel ballsy at all. Like it feels nonsensical to do anything else, actually.
Yeah. Or
right?
One of you could be looking at this and going, oh my God, they switched to a 12 grid. I need to switch to a 12 grid. And it's like,
yes,
look at your data, right? Like maybe you do, but maybe you don't. Like I know back last year when Lacey and I first started talking about doing like the 9 grid, 12 grid kind of thing, a lot of people were switching to it, and a lot of those people have switched back. But back
yeah,
then,
a lot of people switch back.
Yeah, but a lot of people were like immediately jumping on ship because they felt like, oh, if this big person is doing it, then I need to do it. And they were shooting themselves in the foot because Instagram was working really well for them. Like when I did operations, ops worked really well for me on Instagram, but data just doesn't hit as hot, right? Like Lacey and I need to show our personal element. We need to have more of a conversation. Like we need to be able to show more. It's less about it in writing and feeling a little bit more cold. So, like you have to know, like you have to have a way to know for your business and not get caught up in the shiny of other people. And to Lacey's point, like we talked about this 9 grid back in September of last year, September or October, before we even announced our partnership. The 9 grid was on our original stretch, and we were like, let's give it some time and actually see like the data before we make the decision to make the move. So it wasn't this just like, let's jump on the ship. It was like, let's see.
I also think people get very like, it's like the sunk cost fallacy of like, oh my God, but we've been doing this for 6+ months. Like we can't like let go of all this content now. And I was like, archive it all. I don't give a fuck. Like I want to do what's working. Like I don't want to get really over invested in this idea of like, oh, this is how much time we sunk into that. And like, that was worthwhile time to figure out what was working and what isn't. And now we can pivot and use that content elsewhere. Like it's not ever, a loss if you're actually following what is telling you it works.
Yeah.
I got Natalie's question, which I'm going to save, but Michelle wants to know what does switching to a 12 grid mean. So let me just like make that clear really quick. So basically, Michelle, we're just not posting on our feed anymore. Like this is just like a static grid that we'll have there. So if someone lands on Get Datable, they'll just see this. We point them to, you know, like our program, what we're about. We have like stories, we have links up here. We'll still use the stories piece sometimes, but basically it just means like static posts. We're not going to be like in the feed, so to speak. Because yeah, it just wasn't worth it for us.
Yeah. And you'll still see us in stories, and we may even play around with more stories, like strategies and stuff. And the other thing is, it's not like we deleted all that content. We archived, like you can hide and archive content. So like Lacey said, we still have all of that to repurpose for the other things that we plan on doing. So it's not like you're deleting everything. And again, this is not like us saying you should go do this. No, you should look at your data and see what's working for you and make decisions accordingly. This was a decision that we decided to make from our data because we are playing the long game and want to invest our money strategically. And this is what allowed us to do that. But I would never just blindly tell anybody to do any marketing strategy, because I think that that's like
Exactly.
wrong.
And also there's just so much context here, right? Like I have a successful business. Jen has a very successful career. Like we have time to play a long game. We don't love the grind of Instagram for this business right now. Like there's so many factors that go into this decision. So it's just like worth noting that. But Natalie says, how long do you think you should give something before you decide it's not working and do something different? I would say at least 3 to 6 months. I think 3 months starts to give you an idea. Like I think around 3 or 4 months, we were kind of starting to, let me say this differently. Let me be really honest. Around 3 to 4 months, Jen was kind of starting to say this isn't working and I was still hanging on. And then I needed a couple more months to be like, okay, fine, it's not, we need to make a shift. But like, I think we would have been premature still a little at 3 to 4 months. I think 6 months-ish was the right move here. I think for really big things like that, I would give it at least that amount of time. Like obviously this was quite a big shift for us in terms of like marketing engine. If it was maybe a smaller shift, I would have said maybe 3 months. Jen, do you agree with that or what's your thought there?
No, I agree completely. And I think you and I are a good balance for that reason. Cause sometimes I'm too quick to act. Like I am a very quick, like literally I said to my husband, like we should get new cabinets. And next thing I know, like I have an entire detailed project plan and like have made mock-ups within 3 hours. So like I am extreme. And so Lacey needs to balance that and provide that. But yeah, I think 3 to 6 months is spot on, but I think it's 3 to 6 months of measured testing.
Yes.
Like, I don't think it's, I did this for 3 months and now I can decide, like, are you watching? Like, what measurements do you have in place? Like, how are you, like, you need a way to capture that stuff. Otherwise, like, you're just going to be basing it on, do I feel like this is working or not? Right. And that's, like Lacey's story about opening coaching and having that quickly fill up. It could have been easy for her to go, oh, well, it was because I started posting personal. And it's like, well, no, none of those things are what did, right? So like you need an actual way to know when you're testing. It's kind of very much like when you're in 7th grade and you learn about like the scientific process or whatever it's called, like where you write a hypothesis and then you test it and you have data to, it's like that, just like a less nerdy, like cooler way of doing it. So yeah, and the other thing I think, Lisa, that probably made me faster to be like, let's cut this before you was the fact that you have a business that does really well on Instagram. So it also shows though how like this is not a person thing. This is not Lacey's good at Instagram and Jen's not. Like we had Lacey in this business and Instagram was still not doing it because again, our message and our audience, that is not what they wanted to see where they wanted to see it. So I think that's actually a perfect example of like something that works one spot, even if it's the same person, does not mean it's going to work in this other spot.
I was talking to a friend that is like very much an ideal client, like in terms of Datable. And I was like, yeah, I'm like testing a few more things on Instagram. And she was like, looked at me so lovingly and was like, babe, I don't want to read your data shit on Instagram. I just don't. And I was like, oh my God, thank you for saying that. It's so true. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like Jen and I are really good about not being emotional or offended in business in any way, but I like needed to hear that in that moment because I was like, yeah, that I probably wouldn't want to either, but I know I would want to consume it in XYZ way, or I would have preference for this. And so when I was able to kind of like, so sometimes data is qualitative and quantitative, right? Like sometimes you need to hear that from someone that's like an ideal client where it just clicks for you. And I'm like, oh yeah, that backs up all the quantitative data we have about like what's driving traffic and sales and all of that. And so we're not saying that like you just like blindly follow it no matter what, but like when those two things line up, like you're fucking crazy not to listen, right? Like if she said that to me, plus we had all this data backing it up, plus Jen was saying it to me and we didn't make a move, we would just be lighting money on fire on purpose,
100%. Yeah. And that actually, it's funny because earlier this morning, in my corporate job, we were working on something and an executive IM'd me and said, hey, it was actually very ironic that it was an executive, but she IM'd me and was like, hey, we need to change this timeline. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, this one person gave feedback. I was like, well, there's 315,000 people that work here. So like, unless we're going to do a roadshow of more than one, like, I don't really know that that's a sample size that warrants us changing it unless that one person was the CEO, which it was not. So like, but again, I think it's so easy for people to hear or see one of the things and not actually pull together more.
Yeah.
And typically in corporate, you're seeing like before they make a decision, they want to have both of those things in place before they make a move. This was just a weird one-off that I got that I was like, are we reacting to something else here? Because it doesn't feel like it's about this decision.
Yes. So basically, I'm sure like, you know, like the gist here or the questions here are like, okay, how do I start doing this? So we'll go through that like very quickly. We have Jen on here a lot, and we also, like Jen said, have an awesome free training coming out. So we'll go into that a little bit more in depth there. But like basically what I want to say is like, before you even have to get that far into it, you probably already have a shitload of data that you're sitting on that you're just not even looking at. Like Jen was mentioning with Instagram, like how she was saying like clicks from my profile or like what actually are going to tell me if it's driving traffic. Have you even looked at those in a long time? Like, when is the last time you went and looked at like every post that you're putting out and how it's doing? And I'm not saying you have to take like every post is meaningful, but can you see trends there? When's the last time you looked at your email open rates, click-through rates? When's the last time you looked at your sales page views? Like stuff that like you already know and probably have very easy access to. It's just a matter of like, have you even looked at that in a long time? Or do you have any support that's encouraging you to look at it? I think, you know, again, like we were talking about earlier, I think so much of the online space actually like really benefits from us not knowing these things. Kind of like I was saying, like the Batman and Robin thing, like so much of the online space benefits greatly from us not looking at or knowing these things, because that's where they're going to make their money, is when you're like, well, fuck, I don't know. So I guess I'm going to do your Reels training or whatever. Right. But if you can just start there, I think you will kind of be amazed. Hey, Lacey said, oh my gosh, just started the traffic dashboard module and it's feeling like a lot, but so excited to get into it more. Oh, so good. So, well, I don't know if I can, I'll message you, Lacey, and tell you what I was going to say, but we're like adding something in so that like, even if it is feeling like a lot to get started in it, will help with that. I'll make a note.
Yeah. And I would also say like, this is kind of to Lacey, so it's an aside, but join our calls. Like, you know, if you ever are if you're in our program, excuse me, or if you're not, Lacey and I do monthly calls. And so I think sometimes people are like nervous to bring, like if they're feeling overwhelmed or they feel stuck, like bring it. You'll have us live and we'll talk through it. Like, hey, ignore this stuff, just do this. Cause I promise it like when people realize how easy it is, they're like, oh my gosh. But I think, you know, it's natural for us to throw up some barriers, and certainly anything we can do to improve, like we're so open to that as well.
Yes,
so
totally.
I just wanted to mention that.
Yes. Oh yeah. Anyway, so I was just saying, like, there is data that's already easily accessible in your business. Obviously, there are ways to take this much further. There are ways to automate it. There are ways to have beautiful dashboards, like all of those things that we teach. But like, even as a step one, just start looking at the data you already have easy access to in your business. I mean, Jen, I'm curious for you to talk more about that, but I think like, you know, yes, there's so much depth we go into and measure and maximize, and there's so much detail that I think will surprise people. But I think also like, we just need to even start spotting what's in front of us, right?
100%. Yeah. Like, let's, do you want me to pick one and give an example really quick?
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm going to use the word sales funnel, and I know this audience might not necessarily resonate with that phrase. So know that when I say sales funnel, I'm not talking about some like ClickFunnels bro marketing thing. I'm talking about maybe like your views to your discovery, book a discovery call page, and your sales page once someone has had a call and you send them the link to where they can go check out, right? Like that is your sales funnel. It's how are people finding you? How are they moving from becoming a, you know, cold lead to a warm lead to a customer? And so when I say sales funnel, that's what I'm talking about. But I think that is one of the lower hanging fruits, because almost every tool by default collects some data, right? And so you can see how many people are viewing your discovery call. Like, let's just pick discovery calls, okay? How many people are viewing your discovery call page? If you use WordPress, Showit, Squarespace, any of the tools like Kajabi, like go in the back end and look what analytics are available. DM us or email us if you need help, but like go find that number. And then how many people are actually booking your discovery call? And so if you have 100 people going to your discovery call page and one person is booking a call, that right there is a huge data point for you to go, okay, do I need to make changes to my discovery call page to get more people actually converting to book that call? Am I marketing to the wrong audience, right? Like it starts to give you a little bit more of a lens versus you might go, oh, I only had one discovery call booked. I need to go get more people. And it's like, no, you have plenty of people coming. If you've had 100, like we need to figure out how to capture those people.
And what I want to point out here is this is what I was talking about earlier about why this is so important as like someone who's helping your clients too, because what could happen in this scenario is your client comes to you and says, I'm not getting discovery calls booked. Nobody likes me. Nobody's paying attention. They're in all their stuff. Like people think I suck. And so then as a coach, if you don't stop and go, but how many views have you gotten to that page? You guys are off on a wild goose hunt together. And like you're both lost, like you're both drowning in the pool rather than you standing on the edge and pulling them out kind of thing. And so this is why I'm like so passionate about like you just have to like know enough about data as someone that's working in other people's businesses too, to ask the right questions, because like there's such a big difference, like Jen said, of like getting 100 views in one booking versus getting one view. Like the way you would solve that in your business or in a client's business is so wildly different. It's like not even on the like same wavelength. Do you know what I mean? It's like those couldn't be more opposite in terms of like next steps. So
yeah,
I just want to say
like,
that like,
oh, you've had 4, like, oh, okay, client, you've had 4 people look at your discovery call page and nobody has made a purchase. Like, you're right. Everyone must hate you. Like, no, 4 people is not enough people to give you any kind of like significant information, right? And I know sometimes the next question is, well, what is the right number? Like, don't let your brain make things more complicated than they need to be, right? Like we all know intuitively 4 is not enough. Like, does it need to be 50? Does it need to be 100? Does it need to be 1,000? You can make those decisions for yourself. Don't overthink it. But like, I just see people react so quickly to stuff. And it's like, you're right. Like this is so gold for coaches to be able to help back them out and like kind of bring people back down to neutral before they just blow up their business.
Or do, again, just like get not profitable doing a lot of work that they don't have to do, right? Oh, awesome. So good. Lacey said I was literally going to bring this discovery call page Q to M&M. Thanks for noting. Yes, so good. Perfect. Yes, but absolutely bring it to us there. But yeah, I'm so glad that was helpful. But yeah, I think this is the point, right? Like if we know again that it gets you 23 times more likely to acquire leads, blah, 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 as people helping other people in their business, then we almost have a responsibility, in my opinion, to take part in that. Again, it's not that you have to know like every ounce of how to build a dashboard or something. I am co-CEO of a course that does that. And I still don't know every ounce of how to build a dashboards, right? But the point is, I think there is like a responsibility to be like, but I have to know enough to ask the right questions, because if not, we're both just running down the wrong track and I'm not actually helping them to be more profitable. I'm actually not helping them to acquire customers in the way I could. I'm like helping them leave 23 times money on the table kind of, right? So it doesn't mean you have to be an expert at this, but I also think it does call us to an extent to be like, yeah, but what else is here that I could be learning that would actually like really make a dent for my clients and myself, you know? Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for being here. Yes, perfect. Yeah, you can email us too, Lacey. Okay. I think that's all we got for today. I feel like we have so much more we could talk on, but like Jen said, we are going to do a training coming up soon. So be on the lookout for that. It's really good. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. Jen and I like Jen takes everything like 5 steps too far. And normally I'm like good at reining her in, but I've participated in this in every, in every way, taking it 5 steps too far. So if you want to come to a training that we took 5 steps too far, let us know. It is at, we'll probably do it into this month, early next month. But we'll keep talking on this. If you have data questions, let us know, reach out again. Otherwise, start in easy ways, but I promise you'll see it makes such a difference for you and you will want to translate that to clients. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Jen. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks.
I appreciate you skipping out on work to be here.
always. I'm happy to use any time I have to do this. And for the training, it's going to be called The Data You Shouldn't Run Your Business Without. So just to know like what to look out for in case you're like, wait, I've seen you guys do other ones. That's the one. And we should know more probably by next week about when we're going to have that out. But yeah, I co-sign that it's so extra in all the best ways. And thank you for having me here. And if anybody ever has data questions, feel free to tag me in the group or tag me in this thread or wherever. I'm happy to help.
Yes. We're still on Instagram. You can still DM us there. We're just not posting in the feed, so you can reach out there too. All right, guys, I hope you have a beautiful Monday. We will select someone for Tag Your Traffic tomorrow, and we'll see you next week. Bye, y'all.